Welcome back to the new adventures of the monad. In the previous presentation, we started our examination of the first 5 rounds of the moon chain. We still have more to discuss on this topic before we advance to the 6th round. We left off with some monads of the animal stream beginning to causalize. These were the advanced animal monads, some of whom would go on to be the champions in our earth chain. These monads should definitely be regarded as human, and the causal bodies they developed are still in use today. This statement is not quite accurate, but will suffice for our present purposes. We need to clarify something. These monads on globe E are human beings, but do not take any definite part in ordinary life. They float about in this globe's atmosphere like fish in water, but are not sufficiently advanced to share in their normal activities. Hence, they are not born as children of the human inhabitants of globe E. It is amusing to note that Leadbetter described the regular human inhabitants as being not prepossessing in appearance, i.e., they were ugly. These newly minted humans on globe E had emotional bodies, which were produced by a kind of protuberance formed around the emotional permanent atom. Some consolidation and improvement were affected in their emotional bodies as they floated in the atmosphere of the globe. The same was the case of their mental body when they floated in the atmosphere of globe F. The same pattern repeated itself with their causal body in globe G. What was going on in globe E, F and G? Remember, they were not physical as globe D was. So the evolutionary changes being implemented in their bodies they were occupying were totally different than what we would envision in a physical globe. What we need to take away from this description is that the improvements were made to these newly causalized humans, and these improvements continued in the next round, round 6, as they descended through the atmosphere of globe A, B and C. On these globes, the matter drawn into each body was of a higher grade than in the previous round of the various envelopes. It was also more coherent, but as has been mentioned before, the real progress in any globe cycle is made on globe D, where in this chain cycle a physical reality suit is donned. It is all well and good wafting around on the higher planes of matter, and we will do this ourselves as we progress around our current series of globes. However, don't waste your time here on globe D wishing to dissolve into nirvana and somehow think you will have achieved all your goals. Globe D may be the school of hard knocks, but it is here for a reason. Among the advanced animals in the 5th round living in contact with primitive human beings, there was a group of special interest because they individualized in one of the wrong ways. They became intensely vain, which stimulated the imitative faculty to an abnormal degree, causing a strong feeling of separation. Finally, the effort to be distinguished from each other called down a response from the higher planes, and the ego or persona, as I describe it, was formed. They were permitted to individualize because if they had continued as animals, they would have become worse instead of better. This is a good example of the law of self-development. They were clever enough in their own way, but possessed little of any quality other than pride. They formed what is known as the orange group, because their causal bodies showed little color beyond a slight tinge of orange. They numbered approximately 2 million. We will meet this shower of individuals later in this series. Their vanity had and has serious consequences for us today. After death, each group of these newly evolved monads dream away the interval between incarnations until they are reborn in the 6th round, again on globe D. Another set of animals was individualized through admiration of the human beings with whom they come into contact and whom they try to imitate. There was no strong love or wish to serve, but a great desire to be taught, a great willingness to obey. When they individualized through the growth of intelligence, the intellect was always ready to submit to discipline, to cooperate, to see the advantages of united effort and the necessity of obedience. They carried into their intermediate existences a sense of united work and willingness to submit to direction to their great advantage in the future. They formed what is known as the yellow group because their causal bodies showed a clear, bright and rather golden color. They numbered less than 3 million. They were not devoid of emotion, but their emotions were selfish rather than loving. They seem to have developed in their mental bodies qualities which should have had their roots in their emotional bodies, founded in and nourished by love and devotion. There was also a third group of monads numbering more than 3 million, whose causal bodies were mainly pink. Presumably, therefore, they individualized through affection. A fourth group individualized through fear, which stimulated the mind to discover ways of escaping from cruelty. In other cases, animals were individualized through an intense desire to inflict pain. They wanted to have a sense of power over others. This group was known as the fear and power group. We shall pursue the history of these groups in the 6th round of the moon chain, working out their new humanity along the lines determined by their respective methods of individualization. It appears that only the 3 right kinds of individualization caused by the downflow of energies from above were in the divine plan. The forcing upwards from below, which was the wrong way, was brought about by the wrongdoing of humanity. In the higher civilizations of the 5th round, there were many communities scattered over the globe, leading distinctly primitive lives. Some were kindly, although little developed, fighting vigorously when attacked, while others were savage and continually at war, apparently for the mere lust of bloodshedding and cruelty. In addition to these various communities, some large, some small, some nomadic, some pastoral, there were more highly civilized people living in cities, carrying on trade, ruled by settled governments. There did not appear to be much of what we would call a nation. A city, and sometimes a considerable area around it with scattered villages, formed a separate state. These states entered into fluctuating agreements with each other with regard to trade and mutual defense. This sounds rather like our Bronze Age, with good examples being the Minoans and the Mycenaean cultures. As an example, near to the equator, there was a great city with a large area of cultivated land around it. The city was divided into separate quarters according to the social class of its inhabitants. The poorer people lived outdoors during the day, and at night, when it rained, crawled under flat roofs looking like dolmens that we see scattered around Europe and Asia. These structures led into oblong holes or chambers cut out of the rocks. These were like underground burrows going a long distance and communicating with each other in a labyrinthine fashion. The entrance door was made of a huge slab of stone, resting on upright, smaller stones as pillars. The rooms were massed together, thousands of them, lining the 2 sides of one long circular street and forming the outside ring of the city. Think about what has just been described and wonder if the dolmens we see today, which are massive, some with 200-ton roofing slabs, may not have been such structures from an earlier root race. These may have been later repurposed as burial chambers, and this has left us with a false conclusion of what they were originally constructed for. The higher classes of this community lived in domed houses within this ring, built on a higher level with a wide terrace in front, forming a ring right around the city like the road below. The domes were supported on short, strong pillars carved all over, the carvings showing a fairly well-advanced civilization. An immense number of these domes were joined together, at the lower edges and made a kind of community city, a belt with a circular terrace above its inner edge. When we read about the description of Poseidonus, the supposed last remnant of Atlantis, it was described as a city formed in a series of rings. The center of the city was its highest part, and there the houses were taller, with 3 domes rising one above another. The central house had 5 domes, each successive dome being smaller than the one below it. The upper ones were reached by steps inside one of the pillars on the ground floor and winding around the central pillar above. This seems to have been hewn out of living rock. In the higher domes, no provisions seem to have been made for light and air. The highest dome had a kind of hammock hanging from the center, and this was the prayer room. It appeared that anyone who was praying was not supposed to touch the ground. This, according to Leadbetter, was the highest achievement of humanity on the moon chain. They were destined to reach the Arhat level 46, the goal set for the 3rd chain, and would later become the Lords of the Moon. Leadbetter tells us that they were, evidently, civilized and knew how to write. Those of the lunar humanity who were in the 5th round entering the path were in touch with the hierarchy of the time, who had come over from the 2nd Earth chain to help evolution on the 3rd. These mighty beings lived on a lofty and practically inaccessible mountain, but their presence was realized by those on the path and were generally accepted as being a special group of monads by the intelligent humanity of the time. Their disciples had contact with these masters when out of their bodies, and occasionally one of the members of this hierarchy descended into the plains and lived for a while among the humanity of the time. The dwellers in the central house of the city just described were in touch with this hierarchy and were guided by them. This takes us to the end of the first 5 rounds of the moon chain. In the next presentation, we will look at the 6th round. Thank you.